Ken Williams, welcome to Tech Talk with Daniel Albu.
Well, thank you, Daniel, and very happy to be here.
First off, I have to say your contribution to the gaming industry inspired countless developers, myself included. And so I'm really excited to dive into the stories behind Sierra Online and the games you helped create and your broader career.
Well, thank you. I'm honored. So where would you like to begin?
So let's start at the very beginning.
Okay.
Growing up in Pomona in the 60s, computers were, hardly household items, and the idea of gaming as we know it was non-existent. Mm-hmm. So considering your early interests and how different the landscape was, did you ever imagine that you'd be part of pioneering a new form of entertainment?
No. I mean, at the beginning, although I do remember the very first time I saw a game on a computer was on a teletype hooked to a mainframe, I think at MIT. No, it was at UCLA. It was a UCLA, but I don't know where the computer was. And it was just a text game playing Star Trek with simple X's and O's. And in those days, I mean, I'd never even seen a pocket calculator. I was in my second year of college before the pocket calculator, HP 35, something like that, came along. So it was kind of mind-blowing to see the X's and O's spit out of the computer. And right at that moment, I knew that's what I wanted to do with my life. It just seemed so cool that a computer could do that.
Now, you've described your childhood as being split between the library, where you immersed yourself in books, and courtrooms, where you immersed yourself in real-life dramas, apparently. Do you think that those experiences shaped your passion for storytelling and influenced your vision of making narratives such a vital aspect of Sierra's games?
Well, I can't honestly say that I ever had a passion for storytelling. That's really Roberta, not me. I had a passion, really at that point in my life, for nothing more than wanting to get out of my home and wanting to get out of poverty. We were, my parents didn't make much money. We lived in a rough neighborhood. I got beat up a few times at school. Constantly having my lunch money stolen, constantly getting beat up. It was kind of like what I wanted to do was somehow escape. And so I would go to the library and read books on physics, accounting, anything I could think of. And the courthouse happened to also be in the same complex as the library. So I would kill time when, for some reason, the library wasn't open or I was just in the mood, hanging out at a courthouse watching trials. And, you get sucked into a murder trial and that becomes fun. But a lot of it, I remember, I was a kid. So I didn't know better. But I would somehow I decided that anybody into accounting was going to get rich and famous. So I started studying to be a CPA. And I think I was only 14 or 15. And I was doing the mock versions of the CPA exam, or certified public accountant, and thought I could have passed them. And then I started studying law because of the interest in that. And I'd never heard of computers. I knew nothing about them at that point in time. So it wasn't, but that early grounding, I guess, in law and accounting gave me some business skills, even though I'd never been in business, that helped me later in life because I kind of understood all those concepts, I guess you'd say. But now storytelling, I never felt that urge. I mean, that's really Roberta, that whole end of things. I have the technology and the business and the marketing, and she's got all the storytelling. So it was a perfect marriage, I guess you'd say.
Now, in addition to that, you were also a very successful newspaper salesman when you were young. Now, I can imagine that your success in the field gave you a big confidence boost, but I wonder how did you deal with all of the rejection at such a young age?
Yeah, I don't know. It just felt natural. I mean, I knew that if I knocked on 100 doors trying to sell papers, that I was going to close at least one or two sales. And the biggest problem was all the people that already subscribed to the paper. You'd knock on a door and say, "Do you want to subscribe to the Progress Bulletin?" Was the newspaper in Pomona, California, and with a certain number of new subscriptions, I'd get to go to Disneyland and I'd get some spending money. And I don't know. It was good sales training. Just being able to quickly somehow stop the customer from closing the door, and always thinking of one extra line that would keep them there. So yeah, the sales training helped. I was a different person then there too, because I try to imagine myself dealing with being a salesman today and being told no all the time. And I can't imagine that. But the Ken Williams, who was 15 in those years, was a different animal. I was a lot more aggressive, a lot more salesy. It was a different person, I think.
Because usually it's the other way around. Usually as a kid, you can't handle rejection, while as an adult, you understand that rejection is part of life. But with you, it was...
I don't know. I really don't know. It was the me then. And I was extremely cocky, even with Roberta. Like on our first or second date, I said, "We're going to get married." I was pretty firm about it. And I think she turned me down the first time I asked her out, and that I was going to not let her off the phone until I closed the deal. So, I don't know. Yeah, no, rejection is never fun. But, even now, I always kind of figure that, when I talk to people about like doing marketing tests or something like that, or almost anything, I tell them, you got to be willing to fail, like 9 or 10 times in a row in order to succeed. So it just feels like rejection's part of the process to get somewhere. If you're not willing to fail, you're never going to win. So, it's just get all the failures out of the way first so that good stuff can happen.
So in 1973, you started your career as a computer operator. What was your day-to-day like in that first job right after trade school?
It really didn't last long that I was in computer operations. I went to a 9-month trade school that quickly, like almost from the first day, I was way ahead of the class. I was it was like an addiction. I just had to be on the machine. And so I was almost independent of the class by the second day. I just looked at it as free computer time. I mean, in real life, I was paying. I got a government loan to go to school, and which I wound up paying $47 a month for like 10 years. But it was great having time on a computer. And the class started with, in those days, programming, you still were doing wiring literally of boards. There were it was called a 407 accounting machine or something, and then keyboards. I spent a lot of time programming keyboards to read punch cards. And then there was one machine that used a language called RPG that I programmed on. And that was really cool because suddenly, you could really run programs and get printouts, and it was like a real computer. So, but graduating from school, even at the top of the class, I had to start as a computer operator, but I don't remember. And I was working for Burroughs. They were a computer company at the time. And from the day I accepted the job there, I was trying to figure out how to get into their programming group. And I think I did get in. It's funny, I don't remember too much about that because even then I wasn't there very long before I got another job programming an assembler. And I suspect in the first 3 years of my career, I probably changed jobs 5 times. It was kind of like every time I would get a job, I would try for a better job. And programming in those days, it's funny, the whole industry is in kind of a slump now. I'd hate to be looking for a programmer job. But in those days, if you could code, you were suddenly getting phone calls every day, especially in Los Angeles, where I was, saying, please come to work. We'll give you more than you're making now, and we'll give you a $2,000 signing bonus. And the fact that I had changed jobs so often didn't bother anybody. They just needed to find a programmer, and there weren't many in Los Angeles at that time. So I got away with stuff you probably couldn't get away with today. And then I started working for kind of everybody in LA because there was just such demand that even in those days, I think I was charging, I mean, it sounds like nothing now, but I was charging like $35 an hour, which, what would that be? Almost 50 years ago. You could seem like a lot of money. And I would work days, and then I would work 3 other places at night, and not sleep much. But on weekends, Roberta and I had a deal where Saturday was hers and Sunday was for the kids. And so I protected those 2 days. And then during the week, it was like get up early and work until time to fall into bed. And that was particularly tough in LA, where the freeways are tough to move around on, even then. So, but that worked for me because I got very varied experience and was able to work on big online networks in the years before there were personal computers or anybody ever dreamed of the internet. I was working on something called IMSDC and CICS on big mainframe IBM computers, and was kind of a specialist in it and well sought out in the Los Angeles area.
Wow.
Long answer to a short question. Sorry, I rambled.
I love long answers. Keep on coming. Now, you talked about the first computer game you played in your highly recommended book, Not All Fairy Tales Have Happy Endings, which I've read numerous times since it came out.
Thank you.
An amazing read. So when you were playing the game, which was Star Trek, did it ever cross your mind to use the technical skills you've acquired to create entertainment software?
When I played that game was before I had even gone to Control Data Institute, the trade school. It was in a high school trip of some sort to go to UCLA. So at that time, I guess I don't know what I thought. I remember being blown away by it and thinking that this had to be my future. But I was so far removed from that universe, I don't think I could have ever imagined I would someday program computers on my own. It just seemed like this magic, that was happening. And then when I went to the trade school, I don't think I ever thought of games. Even when we did our first game, it was really done to humor Roberta, because she wanted to do a game. There's no part of me that's fun. I mean, really, I'm kind of a business-centric, code-centric kind of guy. And Roberta's kind of the playful one in the family. And I was hard at work trying to build a Microsoft at that point. Bill Gates had released, what was it called? Microsoft Basic. And Microsoft was starting to do well. And I said, look, there's money over there. And I wanted some of that. So I decided I was going to build Fortran, because at my most recent job, I had been programming in Fortran. And I started work on a Fortran compiler. And and I had a compiler development background at that point. And I considered compilers kind of the highest form of code. If you could build the language that builds languages, then you're a super programmer, I guess is how I thought of it. So I started on Fortran, and I think I even started for the TRS-80 that we used to call the Trash 80, using cassette tape. And then Roberta bought me a Apple II for Christmas. And I started working on Fortran for the Apple II. And then And then she had her idea that maybe we could do a game, and happy wife, happy life. So I figured I'd spend a little bit of my time working on her stupid game. And then it turned out that nobody cared about my compiler and everybody loved her game. And, Sierra was born.
So Mystery House was created using extremely limited technology. And in the book, you talk about the tools you used. You talked about VersaWriter to digitize art, and you managed to fit all of the game code and 70 plus images onto a single Apple II floppy disk. And you've done all of this using assembly language. Kudos. Now, given these constraints, why did you choose to fit everything onto a single disk rather than use multiple floppy disks? Was it a technical necessity, a cost consideration, or was it just a fun challenge?
Yeah, it's a fun question. I wonder why I didn't think, well, we could have spread it across multiple floppies. I guess, I don't know, I was so, after working on cassette tape, to suddenly have a floppy disk and 80K, which was more than would have fit on an entire cassette tape, I think, it felt like I had all the room in the world and I should be able to fit within it. And so I don't know. Yeah, probably I could have spread it to multiple floppies, although the operating system wasn't super intelligent in those days. And you booted into a game. You didn't have an operating system and then go run. Now you put in the floppy, powered on the machine, and up popped the game. So I guess I don't remember whether or not there would have been possible to say, please insert disk 2. Instead, I'd never heard the word vector graphics, and I can't tell you if it existed at the time, but I did vector graphics, and that's how I was able to cram the pictures in. And I think it was an 80K floppy, and later somebody realized you could turn it over and get 160K. But at that point, all I really had to work with was 80K, and the operating system, such as it was, had to fit on the floppy. So there wasn't a lot of space available. And, in terms of firsts, it was certainly the first vector graphics on an Apple computer. And it was the first, there was something else that was new that we did. Well, it was probably the first game engine, because rather than building a game, I mentally I'd been programming a language called RPG, which was kind of a fill-in-the-blanks programming language. And partially because I didn't want to have to code the game, I wanted Roberta to build the game. So my focus was on how do I build her the tools to be able to build the game so I can work on my compiler. And so I tried to build something which would be kind of a fill-in-the-blanks type programming language that she could work with. And I gave her an art tool so that she could do the art. And then I went back to doing what I considered real work on my compiler. And Roberta built Mystery House pretty much on her own. And she wasn't a programmer. She had done a little bit of programming, although it should be the first to admit that she got a job as a COBOL programmer, but was a terrible COBOL programmer. And instead, she would bring home her work and I would code it. And it worked. It worked for her. But she only did that, I think, for 60 days or something. She didn't really like it. But so she had a little bit of a programming background. And so she wasn't a total novice. And when I gave her a simple, it was more like an Excel spreadsheet where she could say, this is room 1. And in room 1, it recognizes this verb and this noun. And it interacts with this inventory object, and if this happens, then it triggers that event. And so it was kind of the first primitive, very primitive game engine and first use of vector graphics. And that allowed us to build a game and allowed the game to be built by a non-techie. So all of which was good stuff. But there were no tools. I mean, people don't appreciate that there was no understanding at that point that someday computers could do sound, that there was such a thing as an animation editor. There was such a thing as animation. I mean, it was really a blank sheet of paper. And whereas I would like to think that I was a boy genius or something, it was really just no matter what you did, since nobody had done it before, it would be impressive automatically. So there's a lot to be said for getting there first.
Well, first, and nowadays, apparently, COBOL developers are in high demand because there are many legacy banking systems that still run on COBOL and nobody knows it. So
Yeah, and I would imagine that, that it's probably hard to find programmers because they probably don't want to code in COBOL. I remember it as a pretty lame language. So
yeah, those who did program in COBOL don't want to program in COBOL nowadays, and younger developers never learned it in the first place.
Yeah. Well, code's code, though. It's pretty easy to move from language to language, although employers don't always believe that. It's funny. They have the computers that will now screen resumes, and they'll look for experience in a particular technology when, if you can break through and talk to a human. I mean, in real life, you either got it or you don't. If you understand, I never let experience when I was hiring in a particular language bog things down. I mean, it's really either you either understand how the machine works and how to whip it into shape, or you don't. And particular language or particular package, what do you want to call it, API, you learn those. I mean, maybe you've got a week of downtime while you spin up to speed, but or a month of downtime while you spin. But it's better to invest a month in a person with potential than look for somebody that's been coding in exactly that language and may or may not have potential. So.
Yeah, and in the Sierra days, some of the programmers actually worked on building the engine, but most of them had to learn the proprietary engine you had, either AGI or SCI. So they needed the skills, not the knowledge.
Yep. Yeah, we were divided into two different groups. One that was people that, I guess I'd call them superstars. They could code in C or C++, or actually, I think in those days it was probably assembler. And then there was the game developers themselves that were coding in AGI or SCI. And just like part of the reason we used a game engine, one was platform independence, but the other was that I wanted to be able to involve creative people in the process who weren't necessarily superstar programmers. I mean, today, to use a game engine, you really do have to be a pretty superstar programmer. It's not easy to code in Unreal or Unity. It can be deceptively simple, but as soon as you start trying to create a real game, it's big boy league. It's not easy. And but Sierra's philosophy, or at least mine, was to try to bring creative people as close to the product as possible. And, like Al Lowe coded his own games. Roberta was heavily involved in the code on her games. I don't know if it's because it was a small company, but it just felt right to me that the closer I could bring the creative person to the product, the better. And that's all. I don't know. I mean, the game engine was partially to allow non-coders to build games. So, and our early developers were not software developers. They were just good, creative people who had a sense of humor or passion for the topic. So,
well, nowadays you have ChatGPT helping non-developers make games without them knowing how to code.
It is weird how useful ChatGPT is. I hit recently where I had to do some programming in languages I had never heard of, like React and some of this crazy stuff. Dart. What's the other one I was programming? Flutter.
Go.
And even I used to code in jQuery, and I had to write some stuff in jQuery recently. I hadn't done it in 8 years, something like that. But what I do is I type into ChatGPT what I want, but it generates the code, and then I remember enough for it to kind of sort it out. And I've done things that would have taken a month in the old days in a day because I'm able to. I guess I don't have ChatGPT develop an application, although probably it could. But I have it. I don't know. Help me get started. Help me solve bugs. I'm typing then error messages to ChatGPT and say, what did I screw up? And it's unbelievable. I just really don't understand how that can work. So I'm glad that I'm here to see this next evolution of the industry.
Yeah, and the most interesting part is that you can copy the code as is and not learn anything, or you can actually learn the process. So, for example, you can use prompts like, I'm a JavaScript developer and I'm trying to understand this Swift code or this Java code or this Kotlin code, and explain it to me like I'm a developer, or explain it to me like I'm 5, if you actually want to learn about the inner workings.
It seems so impossible, but it does it. Yeah, and it's funny how many programmers haven't figured that out yet. You know, when I talk to guys on my team, and I'll tell them go to ChatGPT, and they'll say, "Well, ChatGPT is wrong sometimes." I'll say, "Don't worry about it. Just use it. You know, and recognize once in a while it might be wrong, but it's not like programmers always right on the first try. I mean, do it, and it's incredible. I mean, it's just a huge time saver." So,
well, up until a few months ago, it didn't have the sources of the answers ChatGPT would give you. So ChatGPT would be overly confident and would tell you something, whether it was correct or not, it was up to you to find out. But since then, they changed it and it can search the web. So when it gives you an answer, it tells you the websites that were indexed at the time in order to give that answer. And so you can use that to determine whether or not the answer is correct, just like you determine whether or not an answer is correct by looking at Google results and choosing the correct website. So things have changed in the past couple of months.
I wonder if in the current legal, I mean, there's going to be lots of lawsuits against ChatGPT for plagiarism, and we'll see how those sort out. Maybe ChatGPT will get dumber. I mean, I can't imagine that. I don't know. We're living in interesting times. So
true. But back to the 80s.
Yeah.
In the early 80s, you expressed concerns about Sierra being pigeonholed as an adventure game company. So first of all, there's nothing wrong with that. Some of my best friends are adventure game companies. But when you started having these concerns, what were the first steps you took to diversify Sierra's portfolio and expand into new genres?
Well, I don't remember when I started. I'm a paranoid sort. I kind of worry more about what can go wrong than what goes right. And when we were on top of the world, I mean, I'd look at the bestseller chart and I'd see, 7 out of the top 10 in the industry being Sierra, and they were all adventure games. And I knew deep in my soul that that kind of game couldn't become truly mass market. They're too hard, too expensive to develop. It just felt wrong. I don't know why. I just knew that there was a funny time in computers at the beginning where parents thought computers were super educational, and all they could dream of was having enough money to get their kids a computer because they figured their kids would grow up and go to college. I mean, it was kind of a funny time, and the kids that were playing games and the whole way computer gaming was looked at in those days was different. And our adventure games worked, but I didn't feel like that was going to be, the finish line. I knew that there was going to be other kinds of games, and actually even non-games. I mean, I always thought that, like the iPod was the product we should have done. That, I would tell everybody that computers are a superset of books, movies, and records, and that someday it would, basically eat those other industries. And we're getting closer to that. Then, so it was that core vision that kind of was stepping us along. And so I knew that I had to go well beyond adventure games. And certainly, almost immediately I started thinking, how can I branch into other areas? But I had a company in which all of my people thought adventure games. And so I knew I had to do acquisitions or work with other developers to get what I wanted. And that kind of led to our acquisition strategy. And, and I acquired, if you look at the acquisitions we did, I acquired a company that did golf games, a company that did race car games, a company that did flight simulators. I acquired a couple of companies in educational software. I figured we were number one in entertainment. We had to be number one in education. So I went there. So, but it's funny that we're not remembered really for anything except our adventure games. And toward the end, probably our adventure games were, although it depends. We sold an awful lot of Phantasmagoria and King's Quest. And if you took those two out, then, the vast majority of our revenue was then probably in simulators between NASCAR and the Dynamics products. And actually, we did really well in education. We may not have been number one in the world in education, but we were number one in some places. So, I don't know. Sorry, I'm meandering again.
No, keep doing that. Any tangents you go on are fine by me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, you clearly have a deep passion for software development, and it's evident in the fact that you still had programming credits on games like Police Quest and Space Quest, but at the same time, you were also running a very large business. How did you balance your desire to stay hands-on with the increasing demands of leading a fast-growing company like Sierra?
I was lucky in that I had really good people behind me. I'd hired a president who, basically took all of the, the crap off of me. And, plus I knew where my strength lied. When it comes to operations and trying to squeeze an extra nickel out of the cost of a floppy disk, that's not really my strength. I could do it, but I didn't think it was the best thing for Sierra. Where I thought my strength lied was in mentoring and spreading knowledge between our different developers. And Sierra, internally, everybody would tell stories that Ken didn't like anybody except the software developers. And everybody felt I was prejudiced. And I would just answer and say, yep, you got it. I do care more about a software developer than a guy who's copying disks. And nothing against the guy who's copying disks, but it's not what makes Sierra competitive. It's not what people play at home. It's really, just something you got to do. Even the sales function, I used to get, fierce battles with the guy that ran our sales organization because even he didn't think I accorded as much respect as I did somebody that was building a game. And really, some of it was just I wanted to be heads down, focused, working. We had 1,000 people, 700 of which were building games. And those were the people that I really wanted to spend all my time with. And they were spread around the world. And I spent all of my time riding on airplanes, going to meet the developers and trying to get a sense of where the games are at, try to figure out what we could do to make the game more interesting, try to figure out if it was ever going to finish. That everybody who works on a game tends to be a perfectionist, or at least the kind of people that got hired at Sierra. And not only was everybody kind of a wannabe game designer, they were also deeply caring about the product, and they wanted it to be right. But the problem is, and where I guess I worked well, was that I had a sense of the budget. And the marketing organization would tell me how many widgets, whatever the game was, they thought they could sell. And if we thought we could sell 100,000 copies, then I would mentally think I got around $4 or $5 per copy that I can afford to spend on development. So therefore, we got to build this game for 400 grand, and that would be kind of the limit. And so I would be looking at the developers and trying to say no. I mean, really, a lot of my job, and it was tough, was that my job was really to say no. It's kind of like cut it off here because if you don't, it's never going to finish. And they'd say, but it's not perfect. And I would say, yeah, I know, but what are we going to do? Your budget is 400 grand. And and then there was, I guess, even kind of an internal anger, disappointment, sadness at the budgets Roberta would get. But everybody's budgets for the next game depended on the sales of their last game. So if, Alo's last game sold 200,000 copies, then I would mentally think, okay, he's going to be 250 or 300 this round. So that gives him $1.2 million, and that's his budget. Meanwhile, somebody else might be on their first product, and I'll give them a $300,000 budget and say, go prove yourself. And, that's kind of how it worked. So what I would do is at any point in time, especially toward the end, we would have 40 or 50 games in development. I mean, it would be crazy. And each development group, we were broken into, I think, 11 development groups toward the end. And I would visit each group, look at each game, and try to spread knowledge from one development group to another, and try to get a sense of where they were on budget. At the same time, they were trying to, convince me to boost the budget and get the games out the door. And so I was, I'd say 99% of my time was focused on building games. And as far as coding, when I would try to code would be like on an airplane or something. I'd try to sneak something in, but as the company got bigger and bigger, there was less time for fun. And, in the very early days, I could actually code on games. And then later, there was no way. I mean, at the end of Sierra, I just couldn't happen. I spent all my life being jealous of the people that were building games. And wanted, even now when we kind of, Roberta and I built another game, Colossal Cave, people kept saying, are you going to do more games? Are you going to rebuild Sierra? And I'll say, heck no. Are you kidding? I don't want to do that. At this point, all I want to do is kind of quietly write some code and live happily ever after. That's about it. So.
Now, you talked about marketing, and so I want to talk about the packaging of the games that you shipped.
Yeah.
Can you share a specific instance where the packaging choices that were made directly impacted the success or perception of a Sierra product?
Well, I mean, like all of them. I remember going to Japan and seeing the care and attention that the shopkeepers would put into. I mean, if you went into a store in Japan and bought something in a nice store, they would carefully fold and wrap, and everything was just perfect. The quality of the paper was better. The old Japanese magazines at that time, the computer magazines, were printed on a better quality of paper. And as soon as I saw that, I wanted it for Sierra. And so I wanted our boxes to be kind of an experience or a product in their own right. And so I was constantly looking for ways to make them kind of sexy. So we would emboss the covers. We would put tinfoil on the covers. We would do all kinds of crazy things. And, when the Beatles did the White Album, I would talk about, maybe we could just do a clean white box and just try to kind of shake things up. And I thought it would even sell with just a Sierra logo and, one of our designers' names. and do something fun. And then Richard Garriott, when we did Ultima, he kind of moved the notch up a little too, because Richard was who went by Lord British at the time. I don't know if he still does, but he pushed me. He wanted this stupid cloth map in Ultima, and it was what I had to agree to in order to get the product. And I think the darn maps cost me like $5 a piece. And they also have a bunch of demands for the box. But then when the product sold like crazy, I realized that, it wasn't just me that valued a great box, that consumers really cared, and I want a good box. And it's part of the, it's a sad thing that there are no big boxes like that anymore. And I see that there are groups around the internet that are collecting the old big boxes. And that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, well, manuals. I mean, part of what turned me on to Dynamics was when I saw their Red Baron game, or Aces in the Pacific, I think it was at the time, that had like a 400-page manual that went with it. And just the manual alone could give you so many hours of just leafing through the manual and having fun. So there was an understanding early on that a box was critical to the success. In fact, it's frustrating now when you're building a game, because you want to give people a map, you want to give them a reference card, and you can't do any of that. And with Steam, you maybe can, but with like PlayStation or Nintendo, there's not really concept of, what does Steam call them, DLCs or something like that, where you can do all this extra stuff. And there's no box. You can't print on the back of the box. It's just frustrating. Now you're suddenly stuck putting up a menu and says help or something. So
yeah, that's why I feel there's way too much hand-holding in games nowadays, because back in the day, you had to read the manual to know how to play the game. In order to learn the controls, you'd have to open the big box, get the manual, read the manual, and then you'd know what keys to push in order to play the game. But nowadays you have level 1 teaching you which keys to use, and then level 2 telling you the background story, and then level 3. And so I prefer to get right into the middle of the action instead of getting all these levels that were the manual back in the day.
Some of that's due to digital distribution. And so I don't know. I mean, it would be nice in that it's kind of cool that you get to keep 2/3 of the money these days as a developer. Back in my generation, the cost of packaging was so high that you would easily be out $15 for delivering the software to somebody. So it was, in my day, it was 2/3 of the cost for, if ultimately a product would sell at retail for, say, $50, I'd be getting maybe 30 for it, and I would have $15 or $16 into the package, and I would have $5 or so into development, and maybe there'd be 5 to 10 left for me. But in today's world, you get 2/3 of the money right up front, or 70%. So that part of it's good. And it allows you to build a better product. When you can spend, $12 a unit on development, you can do 3 times as much as when you could spend 4. So it's, plus now you're starting so close to the finish line. Like you talked about ChatGPT, it's also true that you can now find music online. You can generate music online these days. You can get a lot of graphics that you can download. You can get skeletons for dragons or about any character you can imagine. And then you're starting at least with a working underlying structure, and then you start polishing it up. So and you can work with people who aren't physically in your office. Suddenly you can search the whole world for the best you can get and not be bogged down by the people that live within 10 miles of the office. So, game developers, I wouldn't say have it easy, because the players are the ones that really won, because the simpler you make game development, the better the games can be. And so you start getting these enormous budgets and really good games. So,
Yeah, but nowadays game development for AAA companies takes years. When
yeah,
back in the day, for Sierra, it would take a year of production, or maybe big budget productions like Phantasmagoria, it would take 2 years because you kept on chasing your own tail in order to get the latest technology implemented into the game. So even though it's easier now to create a game, they spend more time creating said
yeah.
game.
Yeah, I hear about games with $100 million budget or $300 million budget. I think, boy, what I could have done with that, though. But although it gets, when you start getting that many people on a project, it's tough to make the game, I don't know, fun or to have a soul. My vision was always that playing a game should be like reading a book where you connect with the author and you really get. I felt multiple people on a project, especially if they had creative input, just watered down the final product. And I never wanted that. I always liked small teams with extreme power in the minds of or some designer who really had the passion for the product. And even if they weren't, the best musician, they weren't the best animator, they got to control what does the sound like, what does it look like, and just empower that person to build the product that they imagine, and then hope people connect with it. So that was always a day in day out battle for me to get the product to feel like it was a Roberta Williams product or an Allo product, and not get watered down in any way.
Now, you talked about how easy it is to create or generate music nowadays in order to implement the music in the game. But back then, when you used composers, you also actively supported various sound cards. So you supported the Roland MT-32 sound module at launch, and even bundled it with King's Quest IV for a special price. How did this collaboration with Roland originate?
There was a time before music when all the computers had was a simple buzzer that you could click, and then at some point, I guess with the PC Junior from IBM, suddenly you had 3 buzzers in effect. But still, it wasn't like you had real music, and there was not clear where music was going to go. And so I started reading up on MIDI, which was kind of the music standard, and started trying to compose the music for our games using MIDI, which hadn't been done previously. And what happened somehow along the lines, I guess, as music was becoming more part of our business, and in fact, we wrote the drivers that Logitech first used. I remember they stole our drivers, and I was angry at them and threatened to sue them. And then we worked out some kind of a settlement. But we were always kind of on the forefront of music. And I remember even talking to Jobs about music on the Mac when they first did the Mac, and he mentioned that they were in kind of a messy situation. I never heard how resolved, where I guess the Beatles had the rights for music under the name Apple. And somehow they had threatened to sue Apple or something, and there was all kinds of controversy over whether or not the Mac could even do music. So we were kind of on the forefront of all of that. And I mentioned it at a board meeting, and one of my board members knew the founder and CEO of a company called Roland that was doing a lot of the keyboards and amplifiers for performing groups. And so he went on our board, a guy named Tom Beckman. And I don't know. And there was internally, that's at the same time that synthesizers were starting to evolve. And the MT-32 by Roland was a synthesizer. And we even actually released one under our name. and like you said, bundled it. But the problem with most of the synthesizers, you suddenly couldn't do speech and you couldn't do digital sound effects. And so there was kind of this tug of war between doing MIDI music and synthesizers, which could sound really good, and doing better sound cards internally that could do both music and accept MIDI and do speech. And that's kind of the path that won, was kind of the Logitech or sound card kind of direction. And yeah, I mean, at the time we supported the MT-32, I mean, it really produced beautiful music, but it couldn't do any speech. But there was no speech in those days, so it didn't really matter. Yeah, I don't know how it played out. We sold a lot of MT-32s, and we also sold a Logitech or similar, Creative Labs, I think it was called at those days, probably a company. Yeah, it was Creative Labs, I think we went to war with for a while, and then wound up being one of their biggest supporters. But yeah, their sound card, I think, is what we were supporting toward the end. But ultimately, we just wound up writing it, adding a layer of abstraction. One of the nice things of using a game engine is that the game developer doesn't have to worry about it. We had a internal format for music and internal format for digital sound. And then we had a layer of abstraction that mapped it to whatever the real hardware was. So yeah, it was a different time.
So how many bundles did you sell? Because it was pretty expensive. It was like $549.
I don't know. I mean, it would have been like at least 10,000. It was probably 30 or 40,000.
Wow.
I mean, Sierra. You know, it's weird that even like you and Israel had heard of Sierra Online. I was a kid from Pomona, and suddenly we had this worldwide business. And Sierra really had, the best distribution in the world for computer games at one point in time. We were the, Valve of those days, or the Activision, and should have stayed that way. But it crashed and burned at some point. But that's toward the end of the story. So
now the Sierra Network, which launched in 1989. Showcased your forward-thinking vision for connected online experiences, a vision which was also reflected in the renaming of the company to Sierra Online, back in the days before online was something that people actually were doing. So my question is, what made you so confident that online was the future, especially when the internet was just getting started and was mainly available in colleges? Modems were slow, and most people hadn't even imagined connecting their computers to anything.
Yeah, well, I remember Sierra grew out of, I had my business name prior to starting Sierra was Online Systems. And it was because I was a specialist, I guess you'd say, or I was kind of the guru in LA on connecting 1,000 terminals to a mainframe and writing software for them. So when we formed Sierra, it seemed natural to make the name Sierra Online because we were in the Sierra Mountains and it had previously been named Online Systems. But we hit there was some public company or something named Online Systems. And when we took venture capital and searched for the name Online Systems, it wasn't possible. So we named it Sierra Online. And I was always enamored by the idea of linking people together for gaming. And I also always have what I call a crawl, walk, run strategy, where in doing new things, I like to pick something that is brain dead simple. And once you do that, then you do something a little harder, and then you do something a little harder. So for online gaming, it seemed intuitive to me to start with card games, where you had a real obvious game mechanic and could build on it. And then, the story's in the book, but I happened to be talking to my grandma one day, and she was whining about being stuck at home alone, and she was getting to the age where she couldn't go anywhere anymore. And I, just suddenly had this inspiration and said, well, what if my grandma who's stuck at home could pick up a card game 24 hours a day, 7 days a week against another person? And today that's kind of super obvious, but in those days, nobody would have believed it. And so I went to Sprint with that concept. And, I mocked up a little box that I called the Constant Companion. And I said, here's a little box that we could sell to seniors. And then it would allow them to play cards against any other senior anywhere in the world. And could Sprint provide the network? And immediately they said, sure, that'd be great. And gave me a bunch of free network time, which at the time, I'm trying to remember, it was on some standard called X25 or something that would have a local presence in a city. And it was, there was no concept of an internet. This was at least 5 or 6 years prior to the internet. Maybe the internet existed in colleges, but nobody in the real world knew about it outside of colleges. So Sprint said yes. And then I went to some hardware company, and now I'm kind of blank on who it was, and said, I need some computers to give seniors. And was it NEC? I don't remember who, but I got a bunch of free computers. And so with a bunch of free computers and free network time, I needed some seniors. So I found, I think it was like 90 people that were like in their 80s and 90s, and put these computers in their houses and wrote the software to connect them. Actually, Al Lowe, I think, wrote some of the first software and was using our game development engine. And the seniors fell in love instantly. In those days, our servers would overheat almost immediately, and the network would crash as soon as you got 50 or 60 people playing anything. And, we had a lot of learning to do, and we didn't know what we were getting into, but it just exploded. I mean, the seniors, when the system would go down, would just sit there and keep banging on the keyboard, hoping it would come back. I mean, it was so revolutionary to anything they had done before. And they knew they were part of something special. And then we decided we'd do a broader vision and start adding other games. And in my crawl, walk, run strategy, we moved up to games for kids with something called Boogers. And then we did, I actually wanted to do flight simulators. And these were, you got to imagine, this was a 1200 baud modem. And when the world moved up to 2400 baud, which is, I don't know how you'd compare it to today's network speeds, but you could almost, it was horrible. But we were doing flight simulators. We did Red Baron on this network. And then we started doing gambling games, trying to target adults. And then it became obvious that I had a tiger by the tail, and this thing was going to really go big. And so I did a financing. I went out on a tour amongst the investment bankers and raised $50 million for the Sierra network. And it kind of exploded to, it sounds like a tiny number now, but we had 10,000 paying customers. And at that point that I talked to Bill Gates, and he wanted to invest, and AT&T wanted to invest. And then I tried to get the two of them to partner with us, but each of them wanted to be on top. And I wound up partnering it with AT&T. And I rigged a deal where Sierra was going to be a developer for the network, and AT&T was going to run it. And it should have worked, but Sierra's business was kind of exploding at that point in time. And it became, and one of the things that went wrong was the guy that I brought in to run the Sierra network really didn't like Sierra. And I don't blame him. He wanted his own show. He wanted to be a CEO of a company. And so he kind of started trying to figure out how to put games on the network that weren't from Sierra. and started actively kind of trying to not work with Sierra. And the internet came along, and he kind of made the decision to stop adding customers and start moving the whole thing over to the internet. And instead of wanting to use our in-house coding language, our SCI, wanted to rebuild the thing from the ground up in C. And that was kind of a fiasco. And I was opposed, but I was running a large operation, and I really kind of had to trust that he knew where he was going, but it didn't. I mean, they never released another game, as far as I know, after that decision was made. Basically, I got sidetracked, and it all kind of nosedived at that point. And that, if you combine a small company and a big company, what you get is a big company. And big companies move at the speed of molasses. And whereas the Sierra Network had been this insanely fast-growing, highly creative, technologically leading company, it became a disaster that did nothing with far more people and a far bigger budget. So that was sad. And then we sold the company, and I think I never heard really kind of what happened. I think the Sierra Network was sold to AOL, and but I'm not sure. So I'm not sure whatever happened to it. I know it died, and that's about as much as I know. But it was probably the greatest thing I ever did, and should have been huge, but wasn't.
Now, we talked about all of these technologies that Sierra implemented in their products. But from a technical perspective, how did you and your teams evaluate emerging hardware? Things like CD-ROM drives and sound cards, in order to determine whether it was worth integrating them into Sierra games. Because, for example, I interviewed Mark Siebert, and he talked about the fact that he composed music on the MT-32, but most people didn't have an MT-32. So that means that at Sierra, you guys implemented the technologies while taking a huge risk in case those technologies wouldn't be adopted by the public.
We were, because we kind of owned the industry in those days, all the hardware companies would come to us very early in development. And so we always had kind of a sneak peek at everything that was coming. And because we used a game engine, most of our competitors that were coming along at that point hadn't evolved a game engine yet. They were having to code to the hardware that existed. We could move much faster, like on music, on graphics, on anything else, because we were using our own game engine. We could move super quickly. When it came to music, you just drop in a different. We were able to build a game and quickly get it running on lots of different platforms. And sometimes, we would look at things and say, that isn't going to happen. There was I saw a picture of me recently from, it was probably like 1992, wearing a VR headset. And I remember putting it on, and the hardware company was willing to give us money to build games for it. And I decided to pass because it didn't feel like it was, mainstream ready. I remember thinking it's going to be 10 years before this thing is really a product. And now here we are, 30 years later, 40 years later, and it's just now really kind of becoming a marketplace. So there was a little bit of it, which was us making a decision what was going to go and what wasn't going to go. I remember when mice came out. I mean, mice at the time were a controversial thing. Were they going to make it or not? And and touchscreens. Should we support touchscreens? There were all these decisions kind of constantly coming in, and decisions had to be made. And sometimes we made bad ones, and sometimes we made wise ones. But at least we were a big enough company to afford to be wrong once in a while. And we had a engine that allowed us to easily adapt to different platforms. Hardware was evolving super quick in those days. And not all hardware made it. I mean, we were working on ColecoVision and VIC-20 and Oh God, we worked Atari. What was it? Now there was Atari personal computer. I mean, there were all these things that we worked on, but we were able to get something up and running quickly because all we had to do was adapt our engine, and then a whole flood of games came behind it. And yeah, and it was good. So we were able to take bets, take some hits, and people expected Sierra to do that. I mean, one of the things that I always said was that, leaders lead and followers follow, and that it was up to us to lead. And, we'd do something, even when LucasArts started doing adventure games, it was pretty obvious they were copying us. And the market doesn't reward those who follow. It's really who gets there first. And so I was highly focused on trying to get there first. So that was, I guess it followed from corporate philosophy.
So there's an urban legend that you didn't allow your employees to play competitors' games. Is it true?
Yeah, it's true. I can't say I didn't allow them. I deliberately based the company in a place where there weren't competitors, and I would not hire somebody that worked at a competitor, and really wanted to draw a wall between us and other companies. I wanted, and I wouldn't hire games that were developed outside. The only game we really did during my tenure that came from outside the company was Half-Life, and that was because I needed a first-person shooter. I could see that market was big, and we didn't have one. And Gabe Newell happened to work in my office on the right day, and he clearly knew what he was doing. And that was an easy decision. But I didn't like the fact that it was being developed outside of Sierra. But I did tie down the rights so that we would own Half-Life. And somehow later, he got the rights back after I was gone. But it was always important to me to own everything we did. And to, I would, and that's part of what crashed Sierra was after it was sold, they started... they kind of took on the mentality, let's fire all the internal developers and become a publisher. And, there's an argument for that, but it wasn't the way I ran the business. So, and when they did it, it didn't work. And it kind of crashed and burned the whole thing. But, we were definitely heavy internally in development. So, but no, I did not like... it would be wrong. I mean, because people that work for him might have seen something in a competitor product that they liked and wanted to copy. And that would suddenly turn us into a follower instead of a leader. And I don't do that.
Very well. Now, speaking of first-person shooters, in 1991, John Romero visited Sierra's Oakhurst offices. What were your initial impressions of its software's approach to game development and business in general?
Well, I should have paid more attention. It was funny in that I was a cocky kid and I thought I knew everything. And I'm still probably cockier than I should be and still think I know more than I do. But I should have listened to those guys. They showed up and they were, and they were, 4 kids in a band or 3 kids, whatever it was. But they kind of look like, like I looked 50 years ago. They were, kids with T-shirts and ripped jeans and living in a van, and had this goofy philosophy of giving away software, kind of give them the razor and sell them the blades kind of thing to sell additional levels. And I didn't understand how that could work, and I didn't pay attention. And then they wanted to sell me the company for $1 million, and I agreed. We both thought $1 million was fair, but I needed to do it using stock, and they wanted cash, and that wasn't going to work because I would have had to expense it all at one time. And I think we were a public company at that point, so it would have mucked up our financials. And And I was just nervous because there was really no company there. There was these guys, and they were clearly kind of free spirits. And I thought, I'm going to give them $1,000,000. I'm going to get this game that doesn't use distribution, doesn't go in a box, doesn't really fit my philosophy. And they're hoping that they can make more levels and distribute them. But I think at the time they were even mailing people floppies. I don't think they were doing download. And it just didn't kind of feel right. And I passed on it. And it was one of the dumber things I ever did. But who could have known that John Romero would become John Romero and John Carmack? And I mean, how could I have known that I should have done that deal? So, yeah, I talked to Romero recently when I was writing my book, and I had written the whole thing up. And it was funny, and that he called me and said I had screwed it all up and remembered it wrong, and that he has perfect memory. And that he remembered every word said and exactly where we were. And I said, John, just rewrite the chapter. We'll do it your way. And he did. So when you read that chapter out of my book, you're listening to John Romero, not me. So,
well, I read both books because in his book, he also mentions this meeting. So I know that you both describe the same things in both books. So you're fine.
Yeah, no, he remembers it better than me. He remembers going to our house and everything else. I remember none of that, but oh well. I'll defer to his version of events. So.
Now, at that same meeting, it seemed like you were more impressed with their shareware revenue than with their tech, with the tech they used for Wolfenstein. Do you think that Sierra could have adopted the shareware model for, experimental or smaller projects?
Could we have? Sure. But I didn't. I just didn't get it. I mean, I just was dumb. I just did not understand what they were going for. I didn't realize I was going to wind up being the business model that revolutionized the industry. So that was a lack of vision on my part. I was ahead of a lot of trends. And that one I just didn't see, and I should have. And the whole selling them a game and selling them weapons and selling, the add-ons within a game, I didn't see that one coming. So, I mean, I probably would have if Sierra had stuck around another year or two, but we sold just as the internet came on the scene. So I assume I would have jumped on those bandwagons, but certainly when I met with, Carmack and Romero that day, I hadn't figured it out yet. And I didn't understand shareware. It made no sense to me. So that was a miss.
But if the acquisition had gone through, how would you have envisioned integrating them into the company? Would you have encouraged them to focus exclusively on shooters, or would you leverage their technology into the Sierra franchises?
I would have done it their way. And I was always a big believer that you either have to do something somebody's way or not at all. That with a talented person, even when they're wrong, you got to support them. And I would have done it their way, and I would have let them do it. And I would have talked to other teams about what they were doing. I might have tried to encourage them to somehow put the functionality into SCI so that we could use it in other games. But I wouldn't have tried to talk them out of shareware. I wouldn't have tried to talk them out of doing first-person shooters. There was a side of me that didn't like first-person shooters. I really, there's kind of a, I don't know what you would say, innocent side of me that thinks that if you give a young kid a gun, and simulate shooting at other people, that when they grow up, they're going to, be desensitized to shooting at other people. I just didn't like that. It always felt wrong to me to give people in a game realistic weapons. Somehow I was okay with the idea of like a Red Baron game going up and doing dogfighting, because you don't see blood, you don't see, you don't hear screams. that it shouldn't. I mean, because in real life, I mean, if you're up there dogfighting, you're shooting at real people in planes. But I guess for whatever reason, it didn't offend me. But when you start getting to Wolfenstein or Doom or something, you're really shooting at human type characters with a gun. I don't know. I ultimately I'm building games for other people to play, not for me to play. So I try to look the other way on those issues, but it really did kind of grind me that that you're training kids to shoot weapons, and that's not what I would do. And so, from a business perspective, I wanted it, but and I did back down ultimately with Half-Life. Because the market realities, I mean, ultimately, if you're going to be in the business, you got to be in the business. So that was certainly also weighing on my mind that it wasn't real clear to me that this was a business I wanted to be in. So, but then when I passed and they started making a lot of money, then all of a sudden I realized, well, so much for that. I should be there. So,
well, but you did have other revenue streams with handbooks, which apparently handbooks were a solid revenue stream for Sierra. So I need you to tell me the truth on this one.
Yeah.
Were they created purely to help stuck players, or did the team intentionally design tougher puzzles knowing it might force players into buying one?
No, we never. We did have a very high ethical standard. I would never have intentionally left a puzzle in the game just to sell a hint book, but I did love the hint book revenue. And we tried to do clever things to give people their money. I mean, we did the little red plastic to hide the hints. We did. I wanted to do scratch and sniff kind of stuff where you'd scratch off to get the hint. We did hints upside down. I think we did a lot of different clever ways of doing it. We even did a 900 number, and but so we wanted to make it fun, not just take the money. And but there was real money there. We actually got a good business out of doing hint books. So
and it was a great way to fight piracy, because even people with pirated copies of the games would need hint books.
Would buy the hint book. I know we used to joke that there were some games where we sold more hint books than games. And I don't think that was ever actually true, but it felt like it at times, because we did sell a lot of hint books. Now, 900 revenue.
Wow. And then the internet came along, so walkthroughs were publicly available for free.
Yeah. Well, these days you could ask ChatGPT. It would give you the hint. It's weird how ChatGPT can do. I just use it before I'll go to like Adobe site to look up something. I go to ChatGPT and ask them, how to do obscure things with, Photoshop or something. It knows. It's weird. So anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's fine. First of all, you can use it, but sometimes Adobe updates their software. So sometimes it gives you the wrong answer, and then you need to tell it that you're talking about the latest version or that he's wrong. And then he's pretty okay with him being wrong. He says, "Oh, you're right. Here's the correct answer."
Yeah, I've had that experience. Well, yeah, because software is always being updated and the UIs are changing. But anyway, next up.
So we talked about Sierra games being published over here in Israel. So when did the need for localization first come up for Sierra's games? Was it driven by a team member's suggestion, or was it part of your vision to expand the reach of Sierra titles globally?
Yeah, I wish I could say that I pushed that, but I would say that I was pushed into it. And that in the very beginning, our French distributor wanted us to do a French version. And I sent him the source code, and he localized it for us, and I sold it. But then it didn't really come up again until we did an acquisition of a company out of France called Cocktail Vision. And they had great distribution throughout Europe and probably Israel fell under them. And the guy, Roland MT-32, who ran the company, pushed me to do international versions of all the games. And I grumbled a lot, but luckily we'd set up the game so that it was fairly easy to add. And then we started changing our game engine to make the text independent to the game. And then when we started doing CD-ROMs, we made all of the audio tracks independent so that we could localize those. But that came on fairly late in the process. I don't think we really started going with localizations until we started trying to sell in Japan and France. And then when I acquired Cocktail Vision, and I don't remember what year that was, it probably would have been around 1990, then we would have started doing a lot more localization of product. And really, I think we used Cocktail Vision, our European distributor. But we owned them, but they did all of our distribution there. And I think their team did the localization for us. So we didn't really see it too much in the US. We'd send them the US version, they'd send us back localized, and then we'd distribute, or we'd copy it over. So, but other than France, I guess I didn't focus too much on the rest of the world. I should have, but I had our Cocktail Vision group that did it for me.
Okay. EcoQuest 2 was the first Sierra game I finished on my own without using a hint book. And that game was part of the company's edutainment series. What were your thoughts on the edutainment genre as a whole once Sierra started releasing edutainment titles?
I mean, I loved it. I wanted to be number one in education. That was kind of my goal. And EcoQuest was a step that direction. And what else? Dr. Brain series. I knew that we could use our technology to build other kinds of games. And EcoQuest was also kind of pioneering in that I think it was the first game to really kind of focus on environmental issues. And I'm surprised that now that Microsoft owns the old Sierra properties, that they don't re-release EcoQuest, because it actually was. It was a really good game. It was fun. It was attractive and topical. So that should be out there. No, I was real proud of it. I was real proud of all of those games.
Now, as you probably know, Sierra games were packed with Easter eggs, but my favorite Easter eggs were always the ones featuring you. Somehow, you managed to pop up in so many games.
Yeah.
So I want to share all of the games that have Ken Williams.
Oh, look at that.
Okay.
You know more than I do. Yeah, somebody just mentioned me the other day, the Ken sent me, where they said that, because they knew me, but they had never realized that the Ken sent me in the games was me. And they thought that was just wonderful when they made that connection. Yeah, that was in Leisure Suit Larry. That one I know well.
Yeah, so here's you sitting next to Larry in Leisure Suit Larry 1. And this is the famous Ken sent me password over here. This is you making another appearance at the very end of the game, announcing a new Leisure Suit Larry game. Over here, this is you as Chief Kenny Wow Wow in Leisure Suit Larry 2. And this is you as Chairman Kenneth of the Natives Incorporation.
No, I hadn't seen this one. That's cute. Chairman
This
Kenneth.
one you know because you mentioned it in the book.
I like this one.
This is you whipping the workers.
And there's me. And yeah, kind of true. I was always the bad guy.
This is you at the end of Space Quest 3.
Uh-huh.
This is you at the end of Leisure Suit Larry 1 VGA.
No, I never saw this one.
It even says, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ken Williams.
Oh.
This is you as Kenny the Kid in Freddy Farkas.
Very cool. Why can't
This
they
is
ever go skinny? Well, I guess I'm semi-skinny in this one. But,
yeah, and you're in the pool. This is you
and
in the
I'm in the
pool.
pool. Yeah, with the girls.
Mm-hmm. This is you in Leisure Suit Larry 6.
Yeah,
And you also have a
I look
portrait image over here.
That's very
Yeah.
nice. Cool.
There's a reference to you in Police Quest 4. Over here, if you look at the desk, it says your last partner, Ken Williams, used to sit here. Unfortunately, he relocated to Seattle.
Oh, okay. That was kind of mean, but nice. Oh, and there's my picture.
There's
God,
you
how do you track all these down? I don't know.
next to Bill Clinton.
Wow.
And there's you in Leisure Suit Larry 7.
Ah, I know, and mustache is more famous than I am.
But the most interesting Easter egg, in my opinion, is your appearance in Space Quest 1.
Oh,
Because in the early versions of the game, if you typed Ken on the first screen, you would appear complaining about the game being behind schedule.
Yeah, that would be me.
But what makes it especially intriguing is that it was removed from later versions.
Oh,
So I wonder if you were the one who asked Scott Murphy and Mark Rowe to remove the Easter egg.
I doubt it because I always kind of liked those. One of my rules was that that's not nice, but one of the reasons I appear so often in Easter eggs was that I didn't want, left to their own devices, the team members would have picked on people in their own team. And that kind of inside humor is hilarious inside the company, but I didn't think it worked for customers who were buying the games because they couldn't relate. And so I would constantly pull out references to each other. And there are some of those that made it through in the games that are extremely well hidden, because if I'd found them, I'd have yelled at them and made them change them. But it was because of this issue of inside humor versus, I told him it was fair game to pick on me or pick on Roberta. But whereas I was a good sport about it, Roberta would be unhappy if they picked on her. So, so I was always fair game. And I was known to the outside. Once in a while, they'd pick on my brother, was kind of known as Johnny Magpie because he always edited our magazine. And so they would pick on him once in a while. But really, I think I was the most known on that. And that was fine. I didn't mind. I thought it was kind of cute and funny. I was honored.
Now, in your book, you mentioned that Sierra set ambitious financial goals for subsidiaries like Dynamics, often requiring revenue projections to be 4 times the development budget.
Yeah.
Now, you being a developer, and given how unpredictable software projects can be in terms of budget and schedule, how did you balance the push for innovation with the pressure to meet these impossible financial goals?
Yeah. No, it's tough. I mean, that's all I can say. And maybe I was wrong. You know, I remember talking to the guys at Blizzard, and they would totally ignore budgets. And whereas, you know, I would try to shut down people that were seeking perfection and try to focus them on the budget and completing when the game was supposed to. At Blizzard, most days, the idea when they were doing Diablo and some of those early games was, spend what it takes and play test again. And Sid Meier was kind of the same way, where, budget be damned. And there's a certain amount of truth in that it's good to involve players in the process and not get wedded too much to any one thing and be willing to throw things away and start over. That a budget can hurt a game. So, if as I look back on my career, there's probably places where if I had it to do over again, I would have loosened up a little, maybe. I don't know. I know that on the most recent game that we did, Colossal Cave, we went into it with a very modest budget. I said, I'm never going to spend over 50 grand on this game. I'll do it myself, and maybe I'll buy a little bit of artwork someplace. And then Roberta got involved, and she wasn't going to hear of any lid on budget. And it became, 200 grand, 300, 500, a million, 2 million. And, and it's good that we did that because the game that turned out was pretty great. But I don't know. There's definitely, if I'd been running Blizzard, would they have become the awesome company they became? Probably not. So I can argue that one from either side. So. But I've also seen a lot of, after I left the company, there was nobody cracking a whip and saying no. And to my knowledge, no game that happened after I left ever became a hit. I mean, it's somebody's got to be willing to be the hard ass. And or maybe, whoever ran Blizzard was particularly a brilliant person, which I suspect is true. So I don't know. You can argue it either way.
Well, in your book, you attribute the success of Sierra to you hiring A players, and you discuss the idea of A players, who are the individuals who set the tone and drive success, but often sacrifice work-life balance to maintain their performance and rank.
Yeah.
Do you think achieving a healthy work-life balance is possible for an A player, or does staying at the top demand constant personal sacrifice?
I would, I always say I would never want one of my children to grow up as an A player. I mean, it's it's not healthy to work all the time and to compulsively work. It's probably bad that I still do it. I mean, I try to be at my computer by 6 a.m. and Roberta doesn't see me till 6 p.m. And I grumble if she interrupts me during the day. And if, and then even after that, I tend to watch educational YouTubes trying to learn new things. So it's an addictive personality. It's probably not healthy. But does it make it a good employee? Sure. I mean, a AAA player are rare. They're rare people. But if you get one, then you're going to get incredible work out of them. They're going to nail things on the first try. I mean, I did look for that attribute in hiring at Sierra. Those people exist. They want to work. They care about the product. They're passionate. They live for building computer games. And, I think the way I described it in the book was that those kind of people, if there's a problem, you don't got to call them. They've already kind of figured it out, and they're already there at work, and they're already on the computer, and they're the ones that alerted others to the problem. And I guess I'm not. I don't control the world. I don't get to decide who's an A player and a B player and a C player. But I can tell you that if you only hire A and AAA players, you're going to win. And that C players tend to hire D players, B players will hire B players, A players will hire AAA players, and AAA players are angry at anybody who isn't a AAA player. So it's as far as questions about is it healthy, is it unhealthy, I stay out of all that. When you're trying to generate a company against intense competition, it's not easy. It's not easy. The majority of companies fail. And, I successfully ran a company competing and winning in our categories against people like Microsoft, Electronic Arts, Activision. And if somebody finds a magic way to do that with C and D players, God bless them. Sounds great to me. I never figured out that magic formula. I only knew that I could win by getting up early and staying later and hiring people that could do the same. So
apparently, you being a workaholic is keeping you young. So
I don't know if I'm young. I I don't feel as old as I am. I really, I look in the mirror and I go, shit, who's that guy? I don't feel old. I don't, I guess I am. I mean, it's depressing to think I was there at the start of the industry, but I was. And, I write more code now than I did then. So that part's good. So.
Well, you're young now. You were young then. And if back then I looked up to you because you were the CEO of a company that created games that I played as a kid, now I look up to you because as a developer, I always fear that at some point I will not be able to work on games because, the industry doesn't hire people over 50 or over 60. Yeah. So the fact that you at your age are still working on games and still living the dream of every game developer is something I strive for. So you're young, you're keeping me young, you're keeping us all young.
Well, hopefully it's sending a message to companies out there not to write off anybody over 30, which they do. One of my programmers, one of the better guys, just happens to be, I don't know what he is, 60. And he's saying that he when he sends out resumes and he lists his 25 years of experience, that he automatically, or his perception is, gets screened out. And I said, well, strip it down to just the last 5 years, include a picture of you taken 30 years ago. I mean, if you look at Steam, my picture there was taken when I was like 30 and I have long hair and a beard. And the truth is, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are prejudiced against anybody with a couple of gray hairs. And you got to somehow break around that. I tell my guy, whatever you do, don't, kind of hide that, because they can't really ask you how old you are. But, in real life, they should be focused on, are you going to do a great job? At Sierra, I could care less. There was no part of me that could care. Sexual orientation, sex, cultural background, none of that mattered. I just really cared, could you get the job done? And, people say, was it part of your goal to hire a lot of female designers? And it never, ever even would have occurred to me to ask the question, kind of like, why would anybody care? It just really matters. You can get the job done. And I look for people who can get the job done. So
in 1994, King's Quest VII was released. Now, in order to have it ready for Christmas 1994, the game production was rushed, and the game came out with numerous game-breaking bugs, which had to be later patched. Now, what I wanted to know is, how common was it for Sierra to send out physical patches like floppy disks? And what kind of logistical and financial impact did this have on Sierra?
Oh, to send out patch disks?
Yeah.
Yeah, it hurt. Once we became a public company, the mood throughout the company went up or down with our stock price. It was, I hated being a public company. Every 90 days, you had to report your results, and you had to deliver good numbers in a business where one hit can dramatically change the results, or one product's getting from this quarter to next quarter can dramatically change the results. It was, and actually it wasn't even just that. There's magic dates. In order to Christmas, over half our revenue was done in about a 60-day period in October and November. And if a game missed that magic time to get loaded on shelves for Christmas, then the ultimate upside of that game would cut in half or more. So delivering a King's Quest VII in October 15th, when it can be loaded on the shelves at the big U.S. chains, Costco, Walmart, was important, because those guys would bring in huge pallet loads into every store. And if the game wasn't there, plus I would have to buy space. In those days, the way the business worked was that many months in advance, we would sit down with the buyers for these big chains, and we would almost literally buy shelf space and pay for it with advertising. All of these stores run ads, and if I agree to spend $1 million on ads, then they'll agree to give me a shelf. And then it's up to me to put good games on that shelf, because if the games go on the shelf and don't sell through to consumers, I have to take them back. So the tricky part of the business was to first go out and buy the shelf space to load the game in, then having a game that will pull through and sell. And if the game wasn't available and I paid for the shelf space, tough luck. I paid it. And so in a product like King's Quest VII, I probably would have had millions of dollars invested in buying shelf space to put the product. And if I don't deliver the product, then some competitor's product's going to go on that shelf space. I'm going to be out the money for all the ads. And then the game's going to wind up delivering in January and February with no advertising, the budget spent. So, it's market dynamics. In the film industry, I used to say that films would be finished, a year before they reach the public, because you finish them, you take them to Cannes and other places to sell the distribution rights, and there's no concept of a movie missing its date. In those days, we played it much closer to the edge. A game could be done one day and on shelves within a week or two. And I do think the big budget titles today are hyped many months in advance. They're finished many months before they hit the public. And, plus there's not this screwy dynamic of having to buy shelf space. I mean, you can release something on Steam and it's out there the same day you release it. So it was a time in the industry that played to what Sierra did well. And we understood how to do business in that environment. So I don't know if I ran a company today, I'd have to learn a new set of rules. And but Sierra, because we were there at the beginning, the rules evolved with us, and we knew how to work the rules. And there were mistakes we made where you did the math, and we knew what it would cost to patch something. We knew that it wasn't perfect, but we also knew the cost of not delivering. And did I do things in a 2020 hindsight I wish I hadn't done? Of course. You mature. But I wish some of the products I'd held a little bit longer. But had to hit numbers and had to use that shelf space. So.
Now, in 1995, Phantasmagoria was released, which was one of the most ambitious productions of its time. And the game was originally budgeted for $800,000, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But it ultimately cost $4.5 million to develop and was filmed in a $1.5 million studio that Sierra built. Now, with all of the costs and with all of the costs tracking up and the risks involved, did you ever second guess pursuing a game of this scale?
Yeah, it came down to the designer and the track record. Roberta may be my wife, but analytics are analytics. And had she not had a nice unbroken string of hits, I wouldn't have taken the bet. I would have shut down the project. Maybe. I don't know. It looked good. It looked good right from the beginning. We knew we were onto something. And probably, man, it kept it going, even without Roberta. With Roberta on it, there was never any doubt. I whined about the budget almost every day. And, but, it was clear we had a hit on our hands. I didn't think it would be as big a hit as it was. And the costs of producing a game, what was it on? It was 6 or 7, was it DVDs or CDs? Probably CDs.
7 CDs, yeah.
Yeah. And that was pretty weird, but it was also a hook. It was also a hook. I mean, you got to make some noise to get a hit like that. And I mean, that was kind of our first million copy seller, which was nice, and made a lot of money and was part of why Sierra got bought. The Yeah, because we were, a lot of people at that point in time were starting to realize that this was going to become the next big film business or the next big entertainment business. And yeah, we were extremely attractive to a lot of people at that point because we were growing like crazy, and we seemed to be on the cutting edge of a whole new evolution. So I wasn't surprised that we got bought.
But the following year, Phantasmagoria 2 came out, and you've been quite open about your dislike for the game. What aspects?
I dislike the game. I wouldn't personally play it, but the games aren't for me. There were things about it that were bad, and that we released it too close to Phantas, and because we were bought by a company that wasn't wildly excited about magic and wizardry and stuff, that also kind of hurt it. But no, I think it was a great game. But I like for all games in a series to kind of fit the same mold. And it was pretty dramatically different than Phantas 1. And so it was like, didn't follow the formula. But there are people that are big fans of Phantas 2 and like it better than Phantas 1, and people that like Phantas 1 better. And I don't, I cash checks. I don't program the games. Well, I would program the games, but I don't design them, and I'm not the one that plays them. All I really care about is that people get more value for their money than what they spend, and that they're happy. I don't wasn't a cribbage player, but we made a lot of money selling cribbage games. Bass fishing was one of our biggest hits. I mean, who would think you would want to fish on a computer? I mean, you can say that I hated bass fishing, but it was one of the favorite games I ever did. I never fished in my life. I don't fish. And yet, and even NASCAR. I mean, I'm not a race driver. I don't, I went to one NASCAR race and thought it was kind of boring. But I'm not building it for me. I'm building it for them. And so, did I hate Phantas 2? No, I kind of wished it had been more like Phantas 1, but it found its niche, and it's still one of the most respected games we ever produced. And Lorelai's awesome, who produced it, and she was trained by Roberta, and did a good job. Brought it in on time, on budget, good product.
Now, one of my favorite parts in your book is the chapter in which you list the key elements to becoming a better software developer. And you mentioned there that you're striving to avoid writing code tied to performance times as one of the key elements to becoming a better software developer. But unfortunately, a lot of Sierra games relied on CPU cycles for certain functions. So it seems like some of the developers that worked at Sierra didn't adhere to your own rules of software development.
Well, I wouldn't say deliberately write inefficient code. I would say a developer should have a sense of the big picture and how often a given piece of code is going to be run. I've seen people spend days or weeks agonizing over a piece of code that's going to get run once a month during an install procedure or something like that, or during save game. I've seen people trying to get the save game menu up faster. I mean, it's goofy stuff where you got to look at the project and say, this particular piece of code is going to be run a zillion times, so let's make it super efficient. And even then, you'll see people that start focusing on the math and how to make the math more efficient, when really the answer might be, don't do the math, pre-compute it, put it in a matrix someplace. So it's that extra step of standing back from the project, looking at it, and thinking about which are the areas where it really can make a difference, And if it can't make a difference, then focus on speed to get it done, not on, well, the other thing is reliability. A lot of people get so enamored with performance that they forget about the poor guy who's got to maintain the code later. And or the debug time. If you write code, even if it's twice as big, but it runs on the first try, you're so much better off. Then I really, have a lot of rules about how to write code. And, there's two philosophies. One is, it takes, one line of code will almost always run on the first try. 2 lines will probably run on the second try. 5 or 10 lines of code will probably run by the third try. Or the time to debug something goes up exponentially with the number of lines of code. So if you instead write lots of little methods that have a real clear name as to what they do, and debug them independently and write code just to exercise those methods, I tend to be the fastest coder, and yet when you look at my code, it'll be huge, but it'll execute right and it'll run on the first try typically, because you put a lot of attention into debugability and maintainability and
readability.
What else? Yeah, what? And what I should do is take that one book out of that one chapter out of my book that was written like one morning between 2 cups of coffee, and pat it out to a whole book, because there's the seeds of some good stuff there, but I read it now and I kind of go groan. I wish I'd taken a little more time and taken that more serious. The book is funny in that Roberta didn't know I was writing the book, because I didn't know if I was actually ever going to finish it. And I would have been too embarrassed to have started and failed. So instead, what I was doing was between 6 and 8 in the morning each day, I would work on the book and make sure I was done before she would get up and know what I was up to. And didn't tell her I was working on it until the book was essentially done. And I wrote it quickly. It was written in a maybe 90-day period, probably less, with a couple hours a day. And you'll notice in the book, I got really sloppy when it came to researching things. I did a lot of just look it up on Wikipedia, but it could have taken, that's a book that could have taken a couple of years full time to write if I tried to track down every stat. And, it's one of those where I didn't know it was going to be a hit. It wound up being a huge hit. I don't know how many copies I sold. It's got to be 80,000, 90,000 copies. It's crazy. And yet, I wouldn't call it a half-assed effort, but it wasn't my best work. And it could be if I would go back and take it seriously. So I should, if I get free time, go back in and do a second edit of the book. But
what are you talking about? The book's awesome.
I know. I'm always critical of stuff. I kind of, I guess I'm a little, I don't know if I wouldn't say I'm a perfectionist. I just know that I'm capable of more. And the book, if I go back, especially commas, it's so funny, and that I'm so terrible with commas. I look at that book now and I think, oh, crap, how did I screw that up? But, oh, well, people enjoy it. That's what counts. Ultimately, it's the entertainment business, and they're not seeking perfection. They're just seeking to be entertained and have fun and, get a good value for their dollar. So who knows? Anyway, thanks for the plug for the book.
The book is still awesome, even without the commas.
Oh, God. I'll be better next time. Yeah.
Now, after selling Sierra, you expressed concern about the company losing its distinct identity. If you could have stayed on to oversee the transition, what changes or safeguards would you have implemented to preserve Sierra's vision and culture in the future?
I think it just would have been more of the same. I think part of the problem was it got so big and so successful a lot of it revolved around my personality, my being able to be there with the developers and to sprinkle magic from one development center to another. And it was starting to get big enough where it was hard on me physically, being able to be, because we had development centers in Boston, Seattle, Oakhurst, LA, Utah, Paris, London, kind of all over hell, New York. And I had to fly to all those places every month and meet with all the developers. And I should have been able to delegate that and create another level. And that never happened. Instead, what happened is I got kind of burnt out. And when we had an offer to acquire the company, I kind of leapt at it. So either we would have had to stop growing, or I would have had to figure out how to delegate. And I remember a story I read about, what was his name? Michael Eisner, who was running Disney at the time. Disney was one of our role models. And, the reporter said they went into his office and there was one of the chandeliers from one of their cruise ships sitting on the floor. And he was picking out the chandelier. And it was because he was compulsive, apparently, and didn't want those chandeliers out there without him personally blessing them. And I was a little like that. I didn't want marketing sending out any box without me signing it off. I didn't want any ads without me signing them off. And I didn't want a box product without me signing it off. So, at some point, it limits growth for the company. Probably what I should have done was, rather than focused on growing, tried to focus on getting more products that were hits. But it's, instead of trying to produce 50 games across 50 genres, try to pick a genre and ship, like Blizzard did. They had like one product or two products that were big mega hits, or EA with their sports category. So I don't know. I mean, what do they call it? Sunday morning quarterbacking or whatever, where you look back and you think, how would I do it different? I mean, at the time, all I really knew was that I had a formula that worked, and I knew that I was close to burnout and couldn't do it anymore. And there was an offer on the table that would give us some money, and theoretically was going to take a lot of load off of me. There was going to be, in the consolidated company, I was going to have responsibility for the product, and all that other crap that I dealt with on a day in, day out basis, like marketing, sales, and manufacturing, would be completely lifted. Our president had done a really good job of freeing me up, but this was going to even be better, and we were going to have bigger distribution. I really did think when we sold the company that it was going to make us a better company, and it didn't work out that way.
Now, you've mentioned that running a boat taught you more about leadership and planning than running Sierra. Can you share a specific boating experience that you think would have been invaluable in how you approach challenges at Sierra?
It is true. Whether or not I can seize on a particular thing or not, I don't know. But running a boat, you suddenly have to literally be jack of all trades. I mean, to cross an ocean in a little boat, if the diesel engine breaks, you got to fix it. If the air conditioning breaks, you got to fix it. If for some reason you develop a fuel leak, you got to fix it. I mean, there's nobody else in this world that you can look at. And so, I had to become a diesel mechanic. I had to figure out electronics. I had to figure out electricity. I became a marine electrician. So you have to learn a lot of skills, but separate from that, there's a lot of books on how to be a captain and how to, and the study of what can go wrong and what leads to big accidents, and how when you look at most marine accidents, it's really a chain of things that went wrong, not one particular thing. It was that I made this mistake and I hadn't placed that. And also, I guess just being a forceful leader. When things are going wrong on a boat, you don't encourage people to do things. You gotta have pre-planned it and said, when this happens, I need you there. I need you listening. I don't need you arguing. If I say, dial 911 or the equivalent on a boat of calling Mayday, I need it to happen right now. It's the running a boat when you're actually, plus logistics. When we traveled to Russia, getting our boat into Russia, getting us into Russia, getting the dogs into Russia, finding moorage, talk about a challenge. And the extreme pressure and responsibility of knowing that if you make a mistake, people that you care about die. That gets your attention. At Sierra, I knew that if I made a mistake, people were going to lose their jobs. And that's one tier of pressure. But when you know that you make a mistake and people you really care about are going to die, that's kind of a big wake-up call in terms of, what you have to do to prepare, all of the planning that goes into what to do if things don't go right. But if things are going wrong and the Gumby suits or whatever, the emergency suits aren't in the right place, that the fire extinguishers aren't in the right place, if you're not given the right orders, things are going to go way wrong. So, I don't know. Yeah, it is true that I do think that it was a big maturing step to suddenly try to run a boat and cross an ocean.
So how do you handle the pressure? Because it's supposed to be fun, but instead it seems like you always fear the worst at any given moment.
That is me. Even then, I always say that I love everything about boating except the boating. I boat for when we're at anchor off a white sand beach and there's lots of girls around with or without bikinis, and and we're sipping wine and sitting in the hot tub, and that to me is boating. All this crap associated with crossing an ocean is just a pain in the ass to get there. So I don't know. Yeah, and in fact, I probably, if it weren't for Roberta, I would never cross an ocean. But she's not only just the creative one, she's the adventurous one in the family. There's no way in heck we would have crossed. When we left shore, we went across the Aleutian Islands up from the U.S. over to Russia and then to Japan. And when we left shore, I was convinced I wasn't coming back. And I didn't spend hardly any time thinking about how we were going to get back because I couldn't imagine that we'd actually accomplish it, because I'd seen the show Deadliest Catch. And it looked pretty tough out there. And that we could actually get, what it was, 6,000 miles over to Japan and not have some sort of horrible accident was inconceivable to me. But there was no telling Roberta no. And if you're going to be married to Roberta, you sign up. You gotta do what it takes. So she got tired of me saying, you're going to get us killed. I don't know when or how, but you will. And it's probably true, but it's part of the ride. You're going to play the game. So.
Well, she's the queen of adventure games, so she has to be adventurous.
Yeah, she does. And she is. I mean, now we just bought a boat, and the boat we bought, a twin of it, just completed the Northwest Passage, which is, going through frozen ice. I mean, it's where Shackleton and all this craziness. I mean, there's no way that I want to do that. But Roberta, since she found out a sister boat of ours did the Northwest Passage, now she's got to do the Northwest Passage. And so that's the next big battle we're going to have. And we'll see how that turns out.
Now, you've described your philosophy of shooting your own dogs in the past, which is about killing underperforming products. How did that practice play out during your time running Sierra?
Not well, and that you should be really good at pruning products the second you don't think they have a market. But it's really hard to do in real life because you've got money into the product, and it's, that's just tough because the development team will think they've got a winner. But then you look at it and you go, that is not going to work. And so there's tremendous momentum to keeping the product going. And, Outpost is the most famous part of that, in that we had a space game, completely beautiful, great designer for the product, tons of money in the product. And yet I would play it and it just wasn't fun. And I could tell it wasn't fun. And I would ask who on the team was playing the game, and nobody on the team was playing the game. And I'd talk to the designer and he would say, we're almost there. I got to put in this, or I got to put in that, and then it's going to be fun. And the sales force was excited about the product because it looked so good. And even client liked it. Well, Roberta just leaned in to say hi, but she went away. And I should have killed that product in fact, I never killed it. I ultimately got more money into it than I could afford to lose. And we had to release it. And we released it. It was kind of a dog. And then the designer kept working on it. It actually turned it into kind of a decent product. But by that time, it kind of had a reputation as being compost instead of outpost, is what people used to call it. And that was unfortunate because, it's an example of where I should have killed the product. A good thing to do is, as soon as a product looks bad, shoot it. And I did some of that, but not nearly as much as I should. So I can't remember a lot of dogs we released. I mean, if you look back on it, we struggled with products, but we kept going. I don't think we ever, certainly in the adventure, I can't remember a dog. Some like Freddy Farkas never, went into the stratosphere, but were good, solid, fun products. So I don't remember a whole lot of dogs we produced.
Okay. So in 2023, you released Colossal Cave, and we talked about how you felt diving back into hands-on development with Unity while working on the game. Now, you've spoken recently about the challenges of overcoming those early reviews for Colossal Cave, which must feel frustrating given all of the improvements you've made since its launch. How are you approaching the task of reintroducing the game to players who may have been influenced by those first impressions?
Well, you can't turn around first impressions. There's like one marketing consultant that we hired and said, okay, we botched the initial release and we got some bad reviews. What do we do? And he just kind of shrugged and said, oh, you're kind of up the creek at this point. There's really nothing you can do once people have a negative perception to turn it around. But there was no way Roberta and I were going to leave with mediocre reviews for the game. So since that initial release, we have released, I don't know, there's probably got to be 200, 300 change sets on the product, where we added new features and fixed things and polished things. And it's, I'm sure every Steam player, every time they load the game, is mad at us because it's constantly downloading updates. But we've really created almost a different product. The market won't reward it, other than if you look at it, we were getting 3-star reviews, then we were getting 4-star. Now we pretty much always get a 5-star review. And that means that Roberta and I can sleep. We never did it to make money. And, it was a game that lived for 50 years. And our initial going in was that we wanted to kind of create the loop. We started with this game. We want to finish with that game. It's a game that started the company. And it just feels symmetrical to finish our career with that game. And there was no way we were going to exit with it having mediocre reviews. We never built it for making money. This was one that was strictly started as let's kill some time during COVID, and then became kind of a much bigger project than we ever thought we were biting off. And kind of it's if I was going to do another game, I definitely could ship a hit now because now I understand how the game is played. And when we went into Colossal Cave, there were some serious mistakes that were made long before the game was released. And we wouldn't do those again. And it feels like such an incredible waste because now we're spun up to speed. We can do great things, but now we don't want to because I'm back into the boating frame of mind. And we have the game where we want it to be, so we can exit on a high note with a game we're proud of. And I would be very surprised to see us ever release another game. I kind of sort of talked to Chris Pope, who I will call, who's working on Space Venture, kind of a new Space Quest game. And depending on the hour you asked me, I want to publish that game because I love Space Quest. I thought it was a great game. I think I could probably get the rights to call it Space Quest. I thought it was buggy, but that but that it's a really wonderful product. And if there's another game for me, odds are it would be Space Venture. But I think that's a long shot at this point, although I owe him a call. And we'll see. We'll see. But I think that really, in terms of me starting with a blank sheet of paper, building another game that, could. And I think it would be a hit. But I've been there, done that, and I just got a new boat, and I want to go cross some oceans.
Well, don't let first of all, don't let your marketing consultant get you down, because a lot of games that were released in recent years, even AAA games, had buggy releases that were fixed like 2 years after the release. One of the famous ones is Cyberpunk 2077, which was released in December 2020, and it was notorious for having an extremely buggy release. And it was fixed by 2022, like 2 years after that. And then sales started picking up. So eventually, people forgot about the initial release. And nowadays, the sales for this game are great. And they have new patches and they have new DLCs. But nowadays, every release is buggy because unlike King's Quest VII back in 1994, in which you had to ship actual floppy disks, nowadays you can release a patch through Steam in no time.
Yeah, it's part of the problem, realistically, for us, though, is that I want to go boating. I'm not the team. I'm basically phasing out, and there's not going to be anybody to do patches. When I say that, we're actually working on it. We still have
the Vision Pro
version. We have the Vision Pro coming out. I don't know, within the next. It's out in beta test now. And what else have we got? Pico, of all goofy platforms. There's a new Pico device that's kind of allegedly even better than a Quest 3. And we have a very cool version coming out for Pico. So there's still some effort going on, but I'm hoping that for Steam and PlayStation and Nintendo and all those that we published our last version, that I just can't envision myself wanting to hire back the programmers to go do it again. And I could do it personally, but at this point, I want to go boating. So.
Now, I don't know if you're aware, but a couple of years ago, one of our viewers reached out and shared that he had worked at a dubbing studio in France in 1998. And while he was there, he discovered 5 VHS tapes in a drawer containing all of the dialogue scenes from Phantasmagoria 2. Now, these weren't the compressed in-game files transferred to VHS, but rather copies of the original uncropped video cassettes with the raw footage. Now, we ran a Kickstarter to digitize these tapes, and while they do show their age, at the time they were 25 years old, the quality is still higher than the in-game files. And in case someone ever decides to do a Phantasmagoria 2 remaster, these tapes are a great start.
Boy, would they. If I
But
could
my
find similar for Phantas, I'd do it in a heartbeat. That would bring me back. Phantas 2, maybe. Well, in Microsoft, I did have a conversation with them where I think they would let somebody do it. I think they would let, yeah, I think if somebody approached Microsoft, said, I've got those tapes, you catch me offline. I can probably tell you who to talk to. So,
wow, this is insane. Okay.
yeah. Yeah, but that is, I mean, it's a shame that that isn't available at today's resolution. And if all that footage existed, it's surprising it even fit on 5 tapes. I mean, there's a lot of footage to create a game like that. But that would be cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
those
but
are.
with today's AI technologies, you can upscale the VHS tapes. You can't upscale the in-game files because the resolution is really low and the frame it's like 10 frames per second or 15 frames per second. But the VHS tapes, even though they show their age, they have
Yeah.
enough data for you to upscale the footage to something that's
I don't remember how that game worked. It was live action. I don't think it was like Phantasmagoria where there was a avatar wandering around.
So it was still a green screen, but it had real sets, unlike the Phantasmagoria one, which was 3D rendered. So it
Yeah.
worked pretty much the same, but yeah,
Yeah.
it.
I hope somebody does it. I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
But
If something like that came along, or Space Quest, or some Leisure Suit Larry, would be cool. But
so my question is this: do you think there's a chance that similar tapes for Phantasmagoria 1 might still be out there, just waiting to be discovered?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I hope so. I guess that's all I can say. When Sierra was destroyed, I don't think there was any conscious effort put in. It was such an anarchic time that nobody thought to preserve all the original artwork, all the source discs, all the source videos. It was. I think it was anarchy. I wasn't there, so I don't know. Maybe somebody took home the tapes. I would hope so, but no idea. That would be great. I mean, if somebody called up and said, I got all the originals. Yeah, that would drag me back because that would be cool.
Well, I assume that the original tapes were discarded, much like other assets in Sierra's history, whether it was in 1999 or in 1996. But, there may be copies of these tapes in dubbing studios around the world.
Yeah, well, I guess all I can say is I hope so. It'd be nice if somebody would do it because it's still a very great game. I mean, when you play those old games, they're wonderful. So, yeah, I hope somebody does it, and I hope somebody finds those tapes. I would play that game. No.
Now, you often mention focusing on the future and avoiding dwelling on the past. So I have to know how did writing this book make you feel? Did reliving these moments feel more painful or more cathartic?
No, I don't know. It we really went away from game development. I mean, we didn't walk in a computer store, we didn't play a game, we didn't do anything for 20 years. And the book wouldn't have happened except that I couldn't think of anything better to do during COVID, and started writing something completely different. And then I don't know, for whatever reason, stumbled into starting to write about Sierra. And that got us kind of interested enough in games that I went and did a game because COVID didn't end as quick as it was supposed to. Remember, at the beginning, it was going to be a 1 week thing, and then 3 weeks and a month, and kept growing. But now, I'm really anti looking backwards, as is Roberta. She's more like a look back than I am, but I'm kind of like, even when she'll bring up Sierra, I'm kind of like, I don't want to think about it because it always feels to me like I only got a certain amount of brain capacity and I have to toss stuff out so that there's room for something new. And to dwell on things I can't change feels wrong. So I like I think at my 50th high school reunion or something came up. I looked at the list of names. I couldn't remember one name, and I kind of said, "Heck with this." And I'm really kind of focused on where I'm going, not where I've been. It just doesn't really. It just clutters thought. You just can't do that. And still, now there's too much to get done to be dwelling on old crap from the old days. So that this is the first interview I've done in a couple of months since longer than that, since when we were first plugging Colossal Cave. And I'm looking forward to not doing more. I mean, as lovely as this is, and you're a wonderful host, but at this point, I just want to go go focus on boating and take our boat someplace cool. And I wrote 4 books about boats that were a bestseller within that community. And so I don't know. Yeah, it's just something different to do. So.
Now, before we conclude our conversation, I have one final question. What are your plans for 2025, and how can people stay in touch with you and your work?
Oh, our plans for 2025 mostly revolve around boating. We have a new boat. We're going to try to take it to Alaska and Hawaii, and I need to do a bunch of work on the boat to get it ocean crossing capable. You need backups for every system. You need, there's just a lot to be done to make a boat able to cross an ocean safely. So I'm focusing on that, and then it will take a while to get it to Hawaii and do everything else. So as far as staying in touch with us, I may hate to be cruel, but you can't. I mean, I answer every email I get, and I'm very polite, and I really do appreciate every email I get. But they're also kind of a drain on time because there's literally millions of Sierra fans, and there's one of me, and I already kind of work 12 hours a day, and I can't stop myself from answering emails. And I kind of care that Colossal Cave sells, but not so much that it's going to change my life if it does or doesn't. I think we created something great, and I want people to play it, but I'm not earning my living doing that. And so I'm not going to go way out of my way to do interviews or God, I'm sounding terrible, but it's, it's kind of like I did my time on games and I'm ready for some new challenge. So don't know how better to put it. There's probably a polite way to spend that. Now, Roberta will watch this later and she'll scream at me. So she's kind of like, Ken, you're such a joke.
Yeah, but she's trying to kill you each and every time she's taking you out into the ocean.
Yeah, so Roberta she loves adventure. She loves archaeology. She loves storytelling. She loves everything she does. She is an incredible lady, and I'm very lucky to be married to her, despite that I bitch about it a lot. But no, we have great marriage. We've now been married 52 years. So
wow.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. But oh well.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for taking the time to join me for a conversation today, and thank you for all of the wonderful childhood memories you've given us.
Well, thank you. And congratulations on a successful podcast. Very cool. I thank you for doing this.